the Indiana University Correctional Outreach Project's first speaker series. We are thrilled that you all could be here this evening with us to increase our knowledge about medicine, gender, and the carceral state. We've had the privilege of partnering with the amazing women who created the Indiana Women's History Project. Tonight, you will get a chance to learn from them, their experiences, and the work they have done within the Indiana Women's Prison. Through this series, we'll take a deep dive into the complexities that exist as we merge medicine and the carceral state, specifically for the women within IWP. Over the course of the series, you'll hear the stories, understand the why, and most importantly, leave feeling empowered to make a change. Without further ado, I would like to provide you with a brief background of the History Project and introduce our speakers for tonight's Advocacy Today session. The Indiana Women's Prison History Project is a group of formerly and currently incarcerated students who do original research on the history and gender of the carceral state. The IWP-HP scholars have presented their research at national conferences like the American Historical Association and the Association of American Historians, as well as local conferences like Hoosier Women at Work. The IWPHP is publishing a book within the New Press in 2022, edited by Michelle Daniel Jones and Elizabeth Nelson, on the history of the women's prison in Indiana. And we hope to be able to read that book in the next coming year. Without further ado, I want to first introduce our speakers tonight. I will start off with Michelle Daniel Jones. She is a fourth-year doctoral student in the American Studies program at New York University. She is interested in excavating the collateral consequences of criminal convictions for people and families directly impacted by mass incarceration. Michelle's advocacy extends beyond the classroom through collaborations and opportunities to speak truth to power. While incarcerated, she presented legislative testimonies on a reentry alternative she created that was approved by the Indiana State's Interim Committee on the Criminal Code. As a subject matter expert, she serves in the development and operation of task forces, think tanks, and initiatives to reduce harm and end mass incarceration, as she has joined the boards of Worth Rises and Correctional Association of the New York, and advisory boards of the Jami Sisterhood, the Education Trust, A Touch of Light, and the Urban Institute. Next, I will introduce our next speaker for tonight, Christina Kovats. Christina was a founding member of Constructing Our Future at the Indiana Women's Prison, where she also was the clerk in charge of higher education programs. Since 2018, she has been the Director of Development for COF and is the principal architect of the large and very supportive network of post-incarcerated women in Indiana. In 2019, she was a fellow with Code of America, helping to create a reentry app for people returning from prison in Indiana. In 2019 to 2020, she also served as a public policy advocate for formerly incarcerated women in the Indiana General Assembly and helped found and administer the education program in Putnam County Jail. In addition to her many activities, she is also a student at DePaul University. I will now turn it over to Michelle Daniel Jones and Christina Kovats.
Good afternoon and good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I'm going to start sharing my slides here, share my screen, and we'll get going. Very much a pleasure and an honor to be here with you guys again. Last week was, I hope, informative and worthwhile, and I hope that this one is also for you. So where is my present icon? Oh, there it is. Okay. So today we're going to set the agenda. We're going to do an overview of the work that we have been doing and our allies to promote health and reproductive justice for women and to end human rights violations in Indiana prisons. This will include a brief overview of the Indiana Department of Corrections oversight failures and discussion of advocacy before and after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. With that in mind, these are the things that we will cover in today's conversation. And, oh good, my notes showed up. I love it when the actual clicking of the things actually produce the information you need. So, for some of you, you might not know that the Board of Visitors that I talked about last week wherein the legislatures, community activists like Rhoda and Sarah Coffin and her husband, and people like even Governor Conrad Baker, they actually were part of a group of people who visited prisons to look in on the care that the men and women were receiving. Of course, that did not continue in a consistent formation from the 1870s to today. The closest iteration that we have is the Indiana Board of Corrections and the BOC. It was created in 1978, and they provided oversight of the Indiana Department of Correction $500 million budget. But by the early 20s, they became a lame duck, and that's what this cartoon is illustrating from the Indianapolis Star. That they had very little influence and power. They would meet infrequently. They failed to take time. They failed to timely replace board members. They would often review DLC policy and procedures without even a review process. And so that's why they were called the lame duck. In 2001, James Holland reviewed that there was like over 126 laws on the books governing this organization, but discovered that they had no real oversight of prisons in any kind. He pushed a bill to strengthen the power of the Board of Correction, but the legislature killed the bill. It got out of the House. It didn't make it out of the Senate. And they also wrote in the bottom of another bill, which is a very a common tactic they will utilize. I need to put this strip somewhere else because it's in my way. There we go. That actually dissolved the entire Board of Corrections overall. So with no real oversight, policy like the 15% plan was instituted without objection. So the absence of an effective external oversight mechanism creates a place where no one has asked what happens to the interest that is earned off of 15%, the 15% that is automatically removed out of an incarcerated person's pay that they receive. Now, most people are making somewhere between 15 cents an hour and $1.20 an hour, right? But according to this rule that passed in 2008, this 15% plan takes 15% out of that pay, whatever it is, every month, and puts it in an account. And it's supposed to be an account that you get that money when you're released, right? And they give it to you often on a debit card. But because there's no oversight of these practices in any kind of meaningful way, nobody has yet to ask what 27,000 people getting 15% extracted out of their inmate trust funds every month for the entire period of time that they are incarcerated. No one asks about the interest that is earned off of those funds. Nobody asks where it goes. So no one asks if it's morally or ethically right to extract a profit from the slave wages paid to overwhelmingly poor incarcerated people. Yet the IDOC indeed makes money. If there was an oversight mechanism, a real one, maybe this conversation would have occurred in the review process before implementation. Maybe the incarcerated poor person could earn the interest from their own labor. As it stands, the policy continues unabated. And so I'm kind of setting you up with practices over time. I'm going to click now. And so in the state, at the time that the PACE Law Review did a review of oversight mechanisms in the state of Indiana, they found that there was the Indiana DLC program review, which was about jails, programming in jails. There was the Ombudsman, which I've talked to you a little bit about, and the Indiana Department of Health. So when the PACE Law Review conducted a 50-state inventory of the independent oversight mechanisms for correctional institutions in 2010, they found these three. And according to the review, all of the oversight mechanisms in Indiana are, quote, state agencies, and no entity has responsibility for inspecting prison conditions on a routine basis. The review states that the Indiana Department of Correction program review focuses on jails statewide, while the Ombudsman and the Department of Health are supposed to be doing oversight over prisons. Immediately, what is clear is that the state of Indiana, and by extension, the Department of Correction, is essentially providing oversight over itself. In the case of the state jails, the IDOC program review, headquartered at the Department of Correction offices and staffed by DOC employees, is in no way represents an effective external oversight mechanism. So at the Ombudsman Bureau, we find that the Ombudsman is appointed by the governor, and his or her offices are located in the government center, located inside the Department of Correction offices. As I've talked to you a bit before, I've observed that the services the Bureau provides to incarcerated women are not commonly known, especially the freedom to bypass the informal grievance process and submit complaints directly to the Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman Bureau has overwhelmingly substantiated complaints because it is contracted. It's supposed to track contracted care with incarcerated people in addition to the care that the state provides. And what we have found in our research, the research that I conducted just on the annual reports coming out of the Ombudsman Office between 2010 and 2015, that overwhelmingly, over like 78% of all the complaints coming from people was about medical, mental, and dental complaints, right? And those complaints were actually substantiated by the Ombudsman. But the Ombudsman never made a parallel recommendation to that's an error there, IDOC, about any of the recommendation or any of the complaints that came to them from incarcerated men and women. So I think it's important to talk about this fact that you would think that in 5-year period, there would have been at least one recommendation coming directly from the large amount of complaints coming from men and women. And they were medical, they were mental, they were dental. These are all in the healthcare field, which at that time was largely privatized, but it was not. And so I'm going to stop talking about oversight mechanisms now, and I'm going to switch to let Christina talk a little bit about the advocacy that has had to happen outside the Department of Correction, outside the Ombudsman's office, outside of these so-called external oversight mechanisms in order to provide human rights protections and health and reproduction justice for incarcerated women. Christina.
Hi, thank you everyone for showing up and attending. So yeah, the advocacy part of this has really been a big passion of mine the past few years. And I have had the privilege of being able to be up at the legislature during the legislative session and be a voice for the women. In 2018, sorry, I'm losing years here. 2019, when we were up at the legislature, we decided that we were going to introduce a bill that stopped the automatic termination of parental rights. So just to give you a real quick brief history on it, in '97, the Adoption of Safe Families Act was passed into Congress. And what that did is it moved to terminate parental rights if a child was in foster care for 15 out of 22 months. Automatic termination, no questions asked. The intention behind it was try to reduce children that were in the foster home and get them to be adopted out. The problem with it is that if first of all, 80% of the mothers that are incarcerated, 80% of the women that are incarcerated are mothers. And so if DCS became involved with a family and the mother gets incarcerated, this timeline starts, right? And a lot of times, once it came to the termination process, the mother wasn't even notified, nor was she allowed to attend the hearing. Being moms, we would much rather, I mean, that would be the most important hearing that we would ever have in our life, and we would want to fight and contest that. But there was no discussion to be had. And so the bill that we introduced provided judges with, gave judges the opportunity to have a little bit more discretion and to look at the entirety of the situation. So many mothers still stay in contact with their children, and this really transpired from a dear friend of ours, that her daughter was 14 years old, got into the system, and you know, the clock started with her, and they went through this process, and it really made us sit back and question, so what do they intend to do with this 14-year-old girl? Because now they've just severed ties with her mother, which was her only family, a very strong connection that they had, even considering the circumstances. So were the children even being taken into consideration at all, the relationship that they had? And so we ended up getting this passed into law. It was a huge success. It was a victory. But it also showed, it was great insight as to how much work truly needed to be done. And there's many different things that we want to fight for, of course. But we also had to sit back and look, what's the most important thing to do now? And so last legislative session was a very awkward year, and we weren't able to physically be up there. And so it presented several different challenges. However, we did introduce a bill, which was the healthcare for incarcerated women. And so a lot of people don't realize that we know that the healthcare in prison settings is very poor, but the intention behind this bill was to stop the shackling of pregnant women, to provide unlimited pads, tampons, and toilet paper to any woman held in any facility. And there were several different elements to it. MAT, medicated assisted treatment, for pregnant women. They would be required to carefully and be very attentive to any woman that was struggling with addiction prior to her incarceration, and try to protect the child. So we introduced this, and it unfortunately it didn't get very far. It requires a lot of interaction with legislatures, but it was very alarming to know how little legislators know and understand what is truly going on behind the prison. And so Michelle and I have had, and you know, our friends have had several conversations about the necessary necessity behind DOC oversight. And it is very crucial. And so, you know, we live in a very conservative Republican state, and they tend to be very opinionated and kind of stick to their guns on things. But we were able to get them to open up and to listen to us, and they actually very much valued and respected what our opinion was. So we haven't made all of the headway that we intend to do. That we hope and pray that the advocacy doesn't stop, that it just continues on, because there's so many different needs that we need to fight for our incarcerated brothers, sisters, our families. So yeah, it's hopefully next year this bill will be reintroduced, and we have several other ones that we're considering as well. But we find ourselves extremely passionate about the quick separation between mothers and children, and without it being a second thought. It's become a default. And so we really want to force people to take a longer look at that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christina. I think, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think the only thing I would add to that is that the Department of Corrections motivated to maybe by it kind of thrives on a code of personality. So maybe the warden that is here now is willing to work with people, or the commissioners here at that moment is willing to work. The problem is that it results in inconsistent experiences in treatment for us. And that's also a motivator behind putting some legislation behind the work that we do, for sure. So let's talk a little bit about the COVID-19 advocacy. As we said, states are kind of bloated state mechanisms that don't often move quickly enough when there are crises afoot, right? Their responses are slower to get in place. For us, when COVID-19 presented itself, we immediately thought about the threat that it held for our women inside. In fact, I left New York on March 10th, but we got this letter into the governor asking for the release of folks May 5th. And we were one of the first letters in the US. We were asking him to release people who had less than 365 days to serve, and who were more substantially at risk for death as a result of COVID. Of course, Governor Holcomb did not comply with our wishes. And so we did several other various types of grassroots organizing in order to bring some visibility to the issue. We performed a media takeover of MoMA PS1's Instagram account, and went live and had folks share their experiences of what it's like living inside. We wrote an emergency release plan. We literally sat down and brainstormed that if the governor was to let go of these many people, where would they go? What would be their resources? We thought, we looked at what other states were doing, but we also developed a unique plan by researching all of the closed camps, all the closed convents, all the closed retreat spaces, all the closed hotels, and you name it. We had a very detailed plan that other states actually took a very close interest in. We ended up sharing it broadly on what to do if the governor considered releasing our women. We also conducted a webinar with a candidate for Lieutenant Governor, Linda Lawson, in order to also bring greater awareness to the conditions of confinement. And we published several articles. When you're talking about advocacy, you can't just do one thing. You must be willing to deploy several strategies in order to get things across. Ultimately, and you also have to be able to deal with the fact that your advocacy may not result in the outcome that you wish. However, and I'm very excited to say, you can push the consciousness of the community forward, right? So as a result of COVID-19, the women went on permanent or semi-permanent lockdown. They were locked down 18 plus hours a day, no programming, foods being delivered to the housing unit. So some of those dorms are very old. They were built in the 60s and 70s, and they were meant for single occupancy. But some of the dorms on the cottages areas were bloated with 3 and 4 people in the rooms, with little slots for air, ventilation for them outside, no air conditioning on the units, and they were lockdown was literally locking the people in these rooms, which typically those doors always stayed open all year round so that people could get a breeze from a large industrial fans on the housing unit or heat from the large heaters on the housing unit. on the cottages. And so we pushed to end the COVID-19 related conditions of confinement issues. We activated elected officials. Again, this is where the candidate for Lieutenant Governor came in, Representative Carly Macer, Senator J.D. Ford. We again did publishing of articles. We gave media presentations presentation to Fox, to Channel 6, in order for people to understand that you might be quarantining at home in the comfort of your home, but women are being quarantined in buildings not even meant to hold the amount of women that they were holding, under horrible conditions of semi or real solitary confinement. This resulted in the removal of the assistant warden that kind of put his foot down on those issues and would not change those conditions, even though women were grieving, calling family members. They did a whole lot of grassroots organizing inside to raise awareness about these conditions, as well as they were seeking us on the outside to work alongside. The reality of COVID-19 is obviously the reality that people could die. And that reality led some of us, I see another typo error. It must be just like a bad day for me. I don't know. So I see we were worried about the reality of many deaths coming out of prisons across the country, not just Indiana at this point. It became something that we began to think largely about out of this growing network that had developed called the Justice Hub. And the Justice Hub was a national movement focused on incarceration and COVID. And so under the leadership of Kelsey and several, like a gaggle of Yale students, they created a website called mourningourlosses.org. And on this website, we have memorials and testimonies and stories and photos of the men and women that have been lost as a result of COVID-19, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. And now we're actually expanding this mourning our losses to not just people who've died of COVID, but just deaths in general, to honor the fallen and the lost who are dying under confinement. We've held 2 public vigils that were open to the public. The last one that we had, I was able to recruit Michelle Alexander to read a memorial and share her thoughts about COVID-19 and mass incarceration, which was picked up by NPR. But which brought light to the work that MOL is trying to do, which is to empower incarcerated women and men to memorialize their friends and family and their comrades, but also raise the consciousness and the awareness about deaths as occurring behind bars, right? I'm currently working on a traveling memorial of the COVID-19 experience that will travel. We've got a 6-state plan right now to bring this to areas around the country so that people can have a more personal interaction with this memorial. In addition to that, Christina and I are, as advocates, are always organizing and coming up with other ways in which we can bring our issues and concerns forward. And so, Christina, would you take a few minutes and talk about the Chaos Inside podcast that you've created?
Absolutely. So spending time up at the legislature really opened, and I too was very ignorant to anything that had taken place within a prison setting. I didn't know anything about the operation of it, and really the chaos behind it. And so being up at the legislature also validated that even further, of the public's knowledge. And so I decided that it was crucial that so many women's voices have been silenced, and their experience means nothing except for it means everything to them. And there it was constantly the same problems, the same complaints, the same things, that were constantly going on. And so I wanted to give a voice to those women. And so we started the Chaos Inside, and that discusses a wide variety of topics, but we really hit hard with COVID and what that experience was like. We had a former staff member share on what it was like to have to enforce from the rules of the higher ups. Being on the ground with the women in there, it was very traumatizing for this individual. We had people that were actually living in the units and just really scared to death, literally. The Chaos Inside also talks about education in prison, talks about re-entering. So it covers a variety of topics, but it really capitalizes on the true experience of what that's like, and the best way that they can explain that. And I found it so very crucial that that people who are interested and knowing what the truth is, that they have an opportunity to hear truth, and also that the women are able to share what their experience is like. And being incarcerated is a very traumatizing experience, and it continues to re-traumatize over and over again even after you leave. You face and you deal with so much that had taken place on the inside, touching the deepest part of your heart and your soul, and how it affects you and your daily interactions and activities. So the Chaos Inside is on YouTube, and I will go ahead and put the link here in the chat for anybody that's interested. There are several shows that are currently up now, and more to come. So definitely welcome anybody to engage in that, listen to that, and provide any feedback. Yeah.
Thanks, Christina, so much. I'm glad you put the podcast in the chat. I'd like to say that both Christina and I work with Constructing Our Future, which is focused on providing safe transitional housing for formerly incarcerated women. But the challenge with some of our advocacy efforts is that it doesn't sit well with this work of trying to do the housing piece. You can't pile all that in, right? And so this pushed me to, and I mean, it was the very nascent stages of this, realizing that I really need an advocacy arm for the work that we're trying to do. And so I have my 1023 at the IRS right now, forming another nonprofit called Ujima Center for Justice, which will hold all of this advocacy work in a central place. In addition to being a space where people in the city of Indianapolis can come to, when they are requiring subject matter experts to speak about lived experience of incarceration, I'm really interested in education, political education of formerly incarcerated men and women, so that we can increase our civic engagement in the state. In addition to several other projects that we have in mind with this new Center for Justice that we're creating. Elizabeth is a part of this as well. And I'm excited about our additional efforts. This is all being driven by our lived experience of incarceration and our continuation of care of people who have been impacted by the system. And with that, I'd like to just share a few organizations that are here in the state of Indiana that are doing some advocacy that you can get in contact with. Ideal Sea Watch is the most active in my opinion. And the Indiana Prison Advocates is a Facebook group. The Marion County Reentry Coalition is made up of service providers and DOC folk. I've recently joined it so that there is more directly impacted people a part of this coalition. Prison Fellowship has a long history of serving prisons across the country, across the state of Indiana. And then a new house is open called the Trinity Haven House, which focuses on LGBTQ youth. And then there's a national organization that Christina and I are also part of called the National Council of Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls, which has a national agenda focused on the ending of mass incarceration and the criminalization of the survivorship of women. And so my last slide I'd like to talk to you about is like, okay, so now we've gave you this whole spiel. What does it mean to you all? As healthcare providers, as people who are wanting to do care, let me just say, healthcare professionals, you are first and sometimes the only line of defense against abuse, period. From how we are treated when we come to the infirmary with physical injuries, when we come to the infirmary from sexual and gender violence and PREA actions, when we have to come through the infirmary because we're about to give birth or we've just given birth and coming back from the Marion County Hospital, when we are in need of counseling, when there's that critical care for chronic disease, people who have degenerative heart disease and people who have other long-term illnesses, you are sometimes our only defense against complete debilitation. You are the people who can advocate for preventive care. You are the people who are there in those life and death situations. And I have several real world examples. I can talk about my friend, Cindy, who has, while I was incarcerated, had her first 18-pound tumor removed from her body when we did not have privatized medical care. Now that we have privatized medical care, she is growing yet another tumor and they have yet to remove it. It puts all this pressure on her body and on her organs, but she's basically being sentenced to slow death. There's Victoria. Victoria complained of chronic pain, but chronic pain in the carceral system is not treated as real pain. It's not treated as valid, real pain. And so come to find out, once one healthcare provider left and another one came in, come to find out she had stage 4 breast cancer. She had a significant advanced, I don't know what stage it was, advanced breast cancer that she was just living with because no one took her seriously. And we have seen several deaths as a result. Linda Robinette, I speak her name. Gilda Smith, I speak their name. Those were deaths that did not have to occur, right? And so I say, healthcare providers are often the only kind of competent human being supporting incarcerated women in a crisis. And so it's important that our healthcare professionals do not become co-opted into carceral thinking. Carceral thinking says that I can't really believe what this woman is saying. She is trying to hustle me for something. Complaining of pain, oh, that's not really real. I'll give her a Tylenol or I'll tell her to buy some aspirin off of commissary. But as healthcare professionals in the real world, you know that pain is a signal that something is significantly wrong or something needs to be investigated, right? And so as the only line of defense, you have to push for testing, whereas maybe the privatized medical care provider doesn't have that as part of their byline. Women are often prescribed medications over-the-counter medication treatments, when in a normal situation, if that human being had come to a hospital or a doctor, there would have been different care assigned. And so we know through our long experience of incarceration that correctional training reinforces that incarcerated people are not trustworthy, should not be believed, and are not due certain care. What I want to share with you guys is that the healthcare professionals are the only people in the carceral system who can push against that. The volunteers can't, they'll get gate locked. The correctional staff can't, they put their own jobs at risk. The custody can't, they put their own jobs at risk. The women themselves often put themselves at risk and become subject to what I have known my friend Natalie's experienced, bus therapy, where she's a problem, so we must ship her around a facility every 2 years to keep her disrupted, right? And so who can do it? It is that healthcare professional, that person who works not for the Department of Correction, who can say, you know what? This in any other space would receive this care. She deserves this medication. She needs this investigation. This needs to happen. And I can't emphasize that enough. And I will stop sharing at this point because I'd love to open this up for questions. But I really want to emphasize that in real world examples, the carceral system reinforces carceral thinking that can co-opt healthcare professionals. And it is I mean, people share it all the time. We're told in training to look for you to try to get something from me. But think about it. Most people do not want that type of, don't like doctors, don't want to go to doctors to try to get out of work, are not looking for that. If they're in pain, err on the side that it's true. And then if something happened, if someone is trying to gank the system, I mean, then there could be some recourse for the cost of extra testing. But I advocate on the side of doing what you know is preventative and right just care for incarcerated people, erring on the side that they are right and know their own bodies better than you do. We have had women who were not been believed when they were in labor and ended up having, having babies and not in the hospital. I worked with a woman whose child died in that process because the child needed to be removed and the child suffocated and she had a stillbirth. And so these type of things are going on, man. It's really, and I know I talked about this last week. You are held, you have your own standard of care, your oaths as healthcare providers that it can insulate you in ways that correctional staff cannot be insulated. And with that, Christina and I are open for questions. Hold on. Well, if you guys don't have any questions, that's absolutely fine. I hope that this conversation has been worthwhile and valuable to give you the perspectives of what women on the ground are doing to solve their own problems. And we thank you for your time today.
Yes, thank you all very much.
And lastly, just to kind of go off of what Michelle was saying. So yeah, we think that that's why we created our student organization. We want to kind of help with the future physicians who are going to be in the state of Indiana and in the country, just increasing awareness of these kinds of things and hopefully inspiring people to get involved in correctional medicine so that we can make a difference and make a change in the way that people who are currently incarcerated are cared for. And so I want to encourage you to attend our last session next Thursday at the same time, 7 p.m. Eastern time. We will conclude with a discussion about medical exploitation and abuse within prisons in Indiana and beyond, with a focus on gynecological and mental health. And so we'll have Anastasia Schmid here, and Dr. Nelson will again be leading the last session. And then we also, I know we have them listed on the slides that Turley is presenting, but we have a document that we're going to share in the chat, and then we'll also be sending it out on our listserv along with the links to each of the sessions that we have recorded next week, so that you guys can look into these organizations and the ones that Michelle talked about. And if Trulia, you want to go to the next slide, we also have some articles kind of about the data behind like medicine and mass incarceration. They're really interesting. And if videos are more your style, we have videos, but then I also want to encourage people to check out Christina's podcast. I've actually watched a couple of the episodes so far, and it's really moving. So I think it's definitely worth the time if you're looking into that. And then the last thing, I mentioned this last week, but stay tuned for updates, because now that COVID restrictions are decreasing and vaccination rates are increasing, we are hoping that we can start sending students into facilities to learn about on the ground correctional medicine, experience it, and see what we can do, how we can advocate for change as students. And then we are looking for, if there are any first and second years on the talk right now, we're looking for representatives on our leadership team. So please reach out to iucm@iu.edu. I'll drop that in the chat if you're interested in that. So that's all for today. We hope to see you guys next week for our final session.
Thank you, guys. Very appreciative of you guys listening to us and what we had to share today.